Hi, my name is Kimberly Peck. I'm an environmental education specialist at Laurel Hill State Park, Cooser State Park, and Laurel Ridge State Park, all parks that are very close to you. Right now, we have great things happening in our park and have a lot of people visiting to see the trees. The trees are changing this time of year, and it gets really exciting for us. So, trees in general pull people in. They're kind of exciting for people, particularly when they're changing. But they pull wildlife in as well. You can think about trees being a shelter area, a food source, something very important to many of the wildlife species around here. Sometimes some animals make their homes in trees. Things like woodpeckers and squirrels live right in the tree, right in a cavity or hole. They like dead trees, they like trees that are living, they like trees with leaves, without leaves, and even evergreen trees. So one of the things we want to take a look at is what trees do for us. Something that you might think of right away when you're in school every day is paper products. A lot of our paper products come from trees. All of our paper products typically come from trees. There are other sources as well, but you think about the pencil that you're using and the paper you use every day. But many other things come from trees. Even the apple you might be eating right now. Something that you enjoy, something that you love, something that you might enjoy as an after-school snack every day comes from trees. But there's some things that trees do for us that you might not recognize. One of those is that they absorb moisture in the soil. So on rainy days, particularly some of those where we get a lot of rain, if we didn't have trees, everything would flood. We would see a lot of silt and a lot of runoff going into our streams, making them really muddy and look like chocolate milk. The trees take on so much of that water. They act as sponges. It's kind of a secret sort of job that they have in the forest. They are our sponges. If we didn't have them, we would be in trouble for sure. Really, really important to us. But trees have ways of doing things because they have parts that all work together to make a tree, which is kind of interesting. The one part that you're probably familiar with and most familiar with is the trunk of a tree, what all of us want to climb when we get close to a tree. So the trunk of a tree is the thick part of the tree where it's actually what you would call the backbone of the tree. When you look at it actually on the tree, at this maple over here, you can see that it's super sturdy. The roots are connected to it. You can see some of the roots coming around this tree. And it is what is basically sourcing all of that water we just talked about. All of the water that goes down into the soil is being absorbed through the roots and up into the trunk of the tree and then shared throughout the tree. Got to have water. There's also many nutrients that live in the soil that grow. Now the tree trunk is unique in that not only does it grow taller every year, but it gets wider every year. If you've ever taken a slice of a tree trunk and looked at it, you can count the number of rings inside there, and that will tell you exactly the age of the tree. Each year, a new layer is put on. Now, what you're looking at here is the bark of the tree. There's a little bit of lichen on this tree. You can look closely at the bark over here. You can see that it's a fairly thick layer that's on the tree. It's a super important piece. This bark acts just the same way that our skin acts. It protects us, it keeps disease out, it keeps insects from getting into things. There are lots of things that live in the bark. You might have ants crawling up and down. Again, finding a food source. Trees that have thick bark like this one, woodpeckers love to check out because they can find insects in there and find food in there. Very, very important part. And this bark is going to go not only up the trunk of the tree, but out through the branches as well. And speaking of the branches, they're more important than you might think. Even though you find them laying on the ground after a windy fall day, they're a really, really important part of the tree. You can see they move in all different directions. So some of the things that we mentioned coming up through the trunk of the tree, through the roots and flowing through the trunk, then go into the branches. So the branches are kind of like the veins of the tree. This is where the food sources move out from the trunk of the tree, and then also the food sources move in from the leaves down into the branches. These are sort of little veins and highways where all of the nutrients are shared throughout the tree. They seem simple, but they're a really, really important part of the tree. Now, something that many of us are familiar with are the seeds of a tree. So this is a pine cone. See them a lot. This is a great time to find them on the ground. But the seeds of the pine cone actually live inside. Each little layer has seeds underneath. This one very likely already had a squirrel visit it and pull many of those seeds out. So we have pine cones, which would grow pine trees and the little seeds inside, as well as acorns, which grow oak trees. Also something very common to find on the ground. A trick is to try and find one that has its acorn cap on it. Sometimes you find acorns, but not an entire acorn. Really, really good food sources and absolutely essential to trees. This is how we grow more trees. This is how trees reproduce. Now, every tree has seeds, but they can grow in different ways. Some trees also grow from a root source, like a beech tree. A beech tree has great, beautiful seeds on it, but it also, as it spreads its roots, it can shoot up trees from the roots, which is kind of interesting and a little bit different than every tree. Not every tree does that. Some trees also need pollinators. When they flower, they need to have bees and butterflies visit their flowers so that they can reproduce as well. So then they produce seeds, like the apple that we talked about earlier. So check out the seeds that you find out there. They're very cool, and every tree creates seeds, but not always the same time of year. You can often find seeds almost year-round on some trees. So the really fun part that we get into this time of year is the leaves. We're well known here in the Laurel Highlands to have some of the best fall color in the nation. And here in southwestern Pennsylvania, even more, because we have a mix of forest types. So we have the southern oak hickory forest because we sit very far south in Pennsylvania. We're very close to the Maryland and West Virginia border. So that oak hickory forest is often deep yellows and oranges, mostly oak trees and hickory trees. The northern forest, because we have a very high elevation in Pennsylvania, here in Somerset County, we have the highest point in Pennsylvania, which is Mount Davis in southern Somerset County. We get the maple and cherry. So some of the maples that you see that are really, really vibrant and red, bright oranges, some of them even look purple at times. So we really get a mix of colors and a little more spectacular than some other places in Pennsylvania because we sit very far south in the state and we have a very high elevation. So in our area, in our parks, we see so many people coming here just to check out the leaves. So let's look at them closely. Some of the leaves that you might recognize don't look like leaves at all because they're not. They're needles. So these would be the needles of a pine tree. Some of them are very stiff. Some of them are not so stiff. Some of them are very flimsy. These are ones that typically will have green on them all year round. But that doesn't mean that some of them aren't going to change color. Some of this is a white pine, and we can tell the white pine because each little one of these needles has 5 little needles that comes out of the point off the branch. So we call it 5 fascicles that it comes off of. That's a white pine, a really traditional Pennsylvania tree. Right now, you'll see a little bit of yellow on that white pine. Every year it loses some of its needles to make room for new growth, but always has green on it. So you will see green year round. That happens with almost all pine trees, including our state tree, the hemlock, the eastern hemlock. So let's take a look at some of the leaves we've got here. Now here are 2 fantastic leaves. Let me slide these forward for you. 2 of my favorites. So this one, the larger one that you see, these leaves are called compound leaves. It almost looks like they have a branch themselves. But when you look closely, this is exactly where the leaf came off the tree. This is a hickory tree, a shagbark hickory. It has very shaggy bark, really common tree, and definitely delicious edible seeds that are there. So you can see each one of those has multiple leaves that comes off of one leaf stem. And we have multiple trees that do that. This is an ash tree. Much harder to find ash leaves at this time because many of our ash trees are gone. But this is a green ash that was at just at the entrance of the park. We still have some around. Ash, when they change color, the white ash will turn almost purple, which is pretty interesting. And this will be one of the last years we can observe that before we lose many of our ash trees, unfortunately. So those are called compound. So we have the needles. We have compound leaves, the large ones, and then these are really exciting to me. And sometimes we kind of forget to observe ones like this because they're so common. These are what we call entire leaves. So you can see they have a very, very smooth edge going around them. Very, very smooth. It's not toothed. It's very soft, very kind of straight, very smooth. These are entire, so that's a single leaf coming off of there. This one is a red bud tree. It kind of looks like a heart to some people, so easy to identify. It will turn yellow very soon. Some of them are starting to turn yellow. Red bud trees are the trees in the spring that have the beautiful purple flowers on them. They're basically before any of the other trees bloom, so you see them all over the mountainside here. This is one of my favorite trees. This is called a cucumber magnolia. Not a super common tree across Pennsylvania, but a very common tree in this area. The leaves are huge. You can see that. They get a beautiful seed on them that looks a little bit like a cucumber, but it's pink. And then it eventually turns brown and tiny little orange seeds. They look like little orange Tic Tacs come out of the middle of that cucumber. They're a beautiful tree that we see all over this area. So again, we've got needles from the pine trees. We've got compound leaves. We've got entire leaves, smooth entire leaves. Now, the most common one of all, and some of the ones that you might recognize and find most easily, are the toothed or lobed leaves. So when you're looking closely at these, they all look a little bit different. So the one in the middle is a birch tree. And if you look really closely at the birch tree, you can see all along the edges, it is toothed, kind of like the teeth of a comb. So it is not considered an entire, it is a toothed. This is a white oak leaf. It is lobed along the edges. And this is a maple, which we all commonly know. This is a sugar maple, one of the most common here in Laurel Hill State Park. Again, it is almost toothed and lobed. So when you're trying to identify them, this is one of the first ways you would do that. The cool thing about this time of year is that you can go out and find these leaves. You don't have to climb a tree to do so. Many of them are already on the ground, and you can compare. So what I challenge you to do is see if you can find each of those. See if you can find the common lobed leaves. See if you can find entire leaves. See if you could maybe even find some needles, or even trickier are the compound leaves. It takes some time to find them and recognize them as compound, but I challenge you to check them out and give them a try.